The marketplace was alive with noise. Hundreds of alien buyers moved through the grand auction hall, their strange voices mixing into a chaotic hum. Exotic creatures from different worlds were being sold, some rare animals, others intelligent beings taken from distant planets. And among them stood Jonas. His wrists were bound with metallic cuffs, glowing faintly to prevent escape. The young man, barely in his early 20s, stood tall despite the situation. He had been captured months ago when a group of slavers raided his colony. Now he was being sold like an object to the highest bidder. Jonas scanned the crowd, searching for any sign of kindness. But all he saw were cold, calculating eyes. Aliens of various shapes and sizes examined him like a product on display. Some whispered about his species, others laughed, amused by the idea of a human being weak and fragile. Humans are unpredictable, one bidder muttered. Too aggressive, another snorted. The auctioneer, a tall insect-like alien, stepped forward and raised a hand. Lot number 437. A young human male. Physically strong, mentally stubborn, and capable of adapting to extreme conditions. Bidding starts at 5,000 credits. The room fell silent. Many aliens hesitated. Humans were rare in the galaxy, but they were also difficult to control. Most species avoided them. However, one figure in the back raised a hand. 10,000 credits, a soft, commanding voice said. Jonas turned his head and saw her. She was tall, elegant, and strangely beautiful, though clearly not human. Her silver skin shimmered under the auction hall's lights, and her piercing violet eyes locked onto Jonas with an unreadable expression. She wore dark royal robes with golden patterns, signaling wealth and high status. The other bidders whispered among themselves. That's Valera, a noble from the Zarinthian Empire. Why would she want a human? Jonas studied her carefully. There was something different about her. She didn't look at him like the others did. Her gaze wasn't cruel. It was calm, thoughtful, interested. The auctioneer clicked his mandibles. Any higher bids? Silence. Sold. The human belongs to Lady Valera of House Neris. The metal cuffs tightened around Jonas' wrists as two guards approached. They escorted him toward his new owner. He wanted to resist, but he knew there was no point. He had no weapons, no way to fight back. Valera tilted her head slightly, watching him with those strange violet eyes. Come, human, she said smoothly. You belong to me now. Jonas clenched his jaw, but said nothing. For now, he was just another slave. But something told him this was not a normal purchase. And whatever this alien noble wanted from him, he wasn't sure he would like it. Jonas sat silently in the transport ship as it soared through space. His hands were still bound, but he noticed something strange. The restraints weren't tight anymore. It was almost as if his new owner didn't see him as a threat. Lady Valera sat across from him, her violet eyes calm and unreadable. She didn't speak at first, just observing him as if trying to understand something. Jonas, however, refused to lower his gaze. If she expected him to act weak, she was mistaken. After a few minutes, she finally spoke. You are not like the other humans I have studied, she said smoothly. Jonas narrowed his eyes. Studied. Valera gave a small smile but didn't answer. Instead, she leaned back in her seat, her silver skin glowing faintly under the ship's lights. You will not be harmed, human. You have been purchased for a purpose. Jonas scoffed. A purpose? Like being your servant? She tilted her head. No. That answer only made Jonas more confused. Every alien that had bought a human before used them as workers or entertainment. But this woman wasn't treating him like a slave. If anything, she was studying him like some kind of experiment. The ship landed smoothly on Zarinthia, Valera's homeworld. The doors opened, revealing a massive palace carved from shimmering stone. The sky above was dark purple, filled with twin moons that cast an eerie glow. Jonas was escorted inside, but to his shock, he was not thrown into a cage. Instead, he was led to a private chamber. The room was huge, decorated with silk drapes, intricate metal designs, and a massive window overlooking a beautiful alien garden. A soft bed sat in the center, far more comfortable than the cold prison floors he was used to. Jonas frowned. This wasn't how slaves were treated. Valera entered behind him, watching his reaction carefully. "You will live here," she said. Jonas turned sharply. "Why? What do you want from me?" She stepped closer, her gaze locked onto his. "Your kind is unique. You are stubborn, unpredictable, and refuse to accept control. Unlike other species, humans do not break so easily." Jonas clenched his fists. "So, what? You want to test me?" Valera nodded slightly. "In a way." He stepped forward, glaring at her. "I don't care what you want. I will never be your pet." Valera smiled, not a cruel smile, but something almost amused. "Good," she whispered. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Jonas alone in his luxurious cage. As the doors shut behind her, Jonas exhaled slowly. Something about this felt wrong. He wasn't sure if he had been saved from a worse fate, or if his real problems were only beginning. Jonas paced inside his luxurious prison, his mind racing. The soft bed, the clean clothes, the delicious food. It was all too perfect. This wasn't how slaves were treated. What did Valera really want from him? The doors slid open with a soft hiss. Valera entered, her silver skin glowing under the soft lighting. She wore a long, flowing robe, the golden embroidery shimmering with every step. She looked at Jonas with that same unreadable expression. "I see you are restless," she said smoothly. Jonas stopped pacing and crossed his arms. "What do you expect? I was a slave yesterday, and now I'm in a palace. What game are you playing?" Valera took a slow step forward. "No game, human. You were purchased for a reason." Jonas narrowed his eyes. "Then tell me." She studied him for a moment, then finally spoke. "Your species fascinates my kind. Humans are different. You fight against impossible odds, refuse control, and adapt to anything. No other species in the galaxy is like yours." Jonas frowned. "And?" Valera took another step closer. "My people lack something that humans have. Something powerful. Emotion. Passion. The ability to feel beyond logic. I want to understand it." Jonas scoffed. "You bought me just to study feelings." She smiled slightly. "You make it sound simple, but it is not. I have observed humans for years, but I have never been close enough to truly experience it. That is why you are here." Jonas shook his head in disbelief. "You can't just buy emotions. You either feel them or you don't." Valera's violet eyes locked onto his. "Perhaps, but I will find out." Jonas felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't just a guest in this palace. He was an experiment. She turned to leave but paused at the door. "You may explore the palace. You are not a prisoner, but do not try to escape. This world is not kind to outsiders." Then she left. Jonas sat on the bed, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't sure what was worse, being a slave or being part of some twisted experiment. But one thing was clear. Valera had plans for him, and he needed to find out what they were before it was too late. Jonas wandered through the grand halls of the palace, his eyes scanning every detail. The walls shimmered with a strange silver glow, and alien symbols were carved into the smooth stone. Guards watched him closely, but none stopped him. Valera had said he wasn't a prisoner, yet he felt like one. He didn't trust her. She had bought him like an object, yet treated him with luxury. And now she wanted to study human emotions. It didn't make sense. Lost in thought, Jonas turned a corner and nearly bumped into Valera. She stood tall, her violet eyes watching him closely. "You are adapting well," she said, her voice calm. Jonas frowned. "I'm not adapting. I'm figuring out how to get away from here." Valera smiled slightly. "Interesting. Even now, you resist. Jonas clenched his fists. Why do you care so much about humans? She studied him for a moment before answering. My people, the Zorinthians, have ruled for centuries. We are logical, powerful, and superior to most species. But we lack something. Something humans have. Jonas crossed his arms. And what's that? The Illyra took a step closer. The ability to feel beyond reason. To fight for something without logic. To bond deeply, even when it is dangerous. Jonas scoffed. And you think you can learn that? You think I'll just teach you? She tilted her head. I do not expect you to teach me. I expect you to show me. Jonas took a step back. Show you. The Illyra's gaze didn't waver. I want to understand what it means to desire something. To feel something uncontrollable. I have seen humans form unbreakable bonds. I have seen them risk everything for love, for friendship, for survival. I want to experience that. Through you. Jonas stared at her. He had expected torture, experiments, maybe even being forced into labor. But this. You're insane, he muttered. The Illyra simply smiled. Perhaps. Jonas shook his head. You can't just force emotions. You either feel them, or you don't. She stepped even closer, her silver skin nearly brushing against his. Then make me feel them. Human. Jonas felt his heartbeat quicken, but not out of attraction, out of fear. Not fear of pain, but fear of what she wanted from him. Was she playing a game, or was she truly desperate to understand what humans had? Either way, he wasn't just a guest here. He was the experiment itself. And the most dangerous part. He wasn't sure if he could stop her from getting what she wanted. Jonas sat in his chamber, staring at the strange alien sky outside the massive window. He felt trapped, even though he had been given freedom to move within the palace. The Illyra's words from earlier still echoed in his mind. Make me feel human. What did she expect? That he would just magically transfer emotions into her? That she could learn something as deep as love, desire, or sacrifice just by observing him? Jonas clenched his fists. No, he wouldn't be part of this experiment. He needed a way out. A soft hiss came from the door as it slid open. Jonas turned sharply to see the Illyra entering the room. She was wearing something different, a simpler, dark robe without the gold embroidery. Her usual commanding presence seemed softer. You haven't eaten, she said, gesturing toward the untouched meal on the table. Jonas didn't respond. The Illyra sighed and stepped closer. Why do you resist so much? Jonas stood up, his expression hard. Because I am not your test subject. You think emotions are something you can study like a science experiment. They're not. You can't force someone to feel. The Illyra's violet eyes studied him for a long moment. And yet, you feel something now, don't you? Jonas's jaw tightened. Yeah, it's called anger. The Illyra gave a small, almost amused smile. Good, that is something. Jonas exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. You don't get it, do you? You're treating emotions like they're some kind of tool to be learned. But they're not. They happen because of experience, because of pain, joy, trust. You can't just demand them. The Illyra tilted her head. Then make me experience them. Jonas stared at her, trying to understand if she was serious. She took a slow step forward. You say emotions are not a science. Then let me learn them your way. Jonas shook his head. You don't understand what you're asking. The Illyra's expression didn't change. Perhaps not. But you are human. If anyone can show me, it is you. Jonas exhaled, feeling the weight of her words. He could see it now. She wasn't just curious. She was desperate. And that scared him. Because desperation made people dangerous. Jonas had to be careful. He had to figure out a way to gain the upper hand before he became completely entangled in whatever she was planning. His survival depended on it. And for the first time since he arrived, he realized. Valera might not be the only one being changed by this experiment. Jonas sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easy, not in this place. His mind kept turning, trying to figure out his situation. He was free to walk the palace, eat fine food, and live in luxury. Yet he was still a prisoner. And Valera, she was a mystery. She wanted to learn about emotions, human emotions. But why? Why was it so important to her? He needed answers. Late at night, Jonas stepped carefully through the quiet palace halls. The alien guards paid him no attention, as if they knew he wasn't foolish enough to try and escape. He wasn't looking for a way out yet. He was looking for her. Then he heard something. A faint sound, barely audible. He followed it down a long corridor until he reached a door left slightly open. Inside, he saw Valera. She sat in the dimly lit room, her silver hands clutching the edge of a desk. The usual confidence in her posture was gone. Her head was lowered, shoulders tense. Jonas had never seen her like this. She was shaking. For a moment, he hesitated. This was the first time she looked vulnerable. Then, without thinking, he stepped inside. Valera. She flinched and turned quickly, her violet eyes wide. The cold, calculated expression she always wore vanished. Jonas took a step closer. Are you okay? Valera exhaled sharply and stood, straightening her posture. The mask returned. Humans ask too many questions. Jonas crossed his arms. And aliens like you never answer them. A silence stretched between them. Then, to his surprise, she sighed. You are right. I have not told you everything. Jonas watched her carefully. Then tell me. Valera hesitated, as if debating something deep within herself. Then she spoke softly. My people do not experience emotions the way humans do. We feel emptiness where there should be passion. We can understand logic, power, and duty. But love, desire, connection, these are things we lack. Jonas frowned. And you think I can fix that? Valera looked at him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. I do not know, but I had to try. Jonas exhaled slowly. He had thought she was playing a game, controlling him for some selfish reason. But now, he saw something else. She was searching for something she had never known. And that made her dangerous in a way he hadn't expected. Because if she truly wanted to feel, what would happen when she finally did? The next few days passed in silence, but the tension between Jonas and Valera hung thick in the air. They didn't speak as much, but the quiet was different now. It wasn't hostile, but rather uncertain. Jonas couldn't ignore the fact that Valera had changed. She had shown him a side of herself he hadn't expected, the cracks in her armor. He had once believed she was just a high-ranking alien toying with him, but now he saw something else. She was broken in a way he hadn't understood before. He had expected her to be a calculating and distant ruler, but now she seemed almost fragile. It was that fragility that worried him. One evening, as he wandered the palace gardens, lost in thought, he saw her approach from the shadows. Her silver robes glowed softly in the dim light, and she didn't speak at first. Jonas turned to face her. What do you want, Valera? She stopped a few feet away, her eyes focused on the ground. There was no arrogance, no power in her demeanor now. You were right, she said quietly. I thought I could control it. I thought I could control you. But now, I don't know. Jonas raised an eyebrow. Control me? Or control yourself? Her eyes met his, and for the first time, she looked lost. I thought emotions were something that could be studied. But it's not that simple. I tried to force it, to make you feel for me, to make myself feel something. But it's more than that. I can't just take it. Jonas took a deep breath. He had heard her admit something that neither of them had dared to say before. She was not in control. Not of him, not of her emotions, not of anything. Valera, he began, his voice softer than usual. You can't force emotions. You can't demand love or desire. You have to let them happen. She turned away, her face hidden in the shadows. I don't know how. Jonas felt a tug of sympathy, but he pushed it aside. Sympathy wouldn't change anything. But now I'm being watched. Her voice was strained. I was ordered to terminate this experiment. I was told I had to turn you over to the Zorinthian Council for further study. Jonas' heart sank. And you're going to do it. She turned to face him, her expression cold once again. I have no choice. If I refuse, I will be punished. Jonas clenched his fists. He had known this day would come, but hearing it from her mouth made it real. You have a choice, Valera, he said, his voice firm. You don't have to obey them. You don't have to follow their rules. You can choose what happens next. She stared at him for a long time, her violet eyes full of doubt and fear. Finally, after what seemed like forever, she spoke. I can't. If I refuse, they will destroy everything I've worked for. Jonas stepped closer. Then we leave. Together. You don't have to face this alone. For a moment, Valera said nothing. Then slowly she nodded. You're right. I can't do this without you. A strange sense of determination filled Jonas. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something much bigger, for the chance to choose their own fate. And in that moment, Jonas realized something. He had never been a slave to her. He had never been her test subject. They were both prisoners of their pasts, of their worlds, and now of the choices they had to make. But together, they could break free. The tension in the air was thick as Jonas and Valera stood side by side in the dimly lit room, a plan taking shape between them. They had decided. They would escape. No more hiding behind walls of luxury or false pretenses. The Zorinthian Empire would not control their lives any longer. Jonas had been preparing for days, observing the palace guards and the patrol routes. He had picked up enough to know that the palace was full of weaknesses. There were blind spots in the security system, routes that were barely patrolled. All they needed was the right moment. Valera paced back and forth, her mind clearly working through the same thoughts. Despite her previous confidence, she now looked vulnerable, uncertain. I can't believe we're doing this, she whispered, almost to herself. If we're caught, we're both dead. Jonas turned to her, his voice calm but firm. We won't get caught. We just need to stick to the plan. She looked up at him, her violet eyes filled with doubt, but also something else. Trust. For the first time, it seemed that she wasn't just the commanding alien noble she had been at the start. She was, in a way, just another person, just like him, trying to find her place in a world that didn't understand her. You really think we can make it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonas nodded. I don't just think we can. I know we can. Valera hesitated, then finally stepped closer to him. And if we get caught? Jonas didn't flinch. We won't. She looked at him with a mixture of uncertainty and respect. I trust you. The words hit him harder than he expected. Trust. After everything that had happened between them, after all the manipulation, the experiments, and the games, here they were, standing together in a moment of real connection. We need to go now, Jonas said, shaking himself out of the moment. The longer they waited, the more likely it was that their plan would fail. They left the room and moved silently through the hallways, each step measured. The palace was quiet at this hour, with most of the staff and guards resting. They reached the back exit without incident, a small, unused door that led to the royal gardens. But as Jonas reached for the handle, he froze. A soft, unmistakable sound, footsteps approaching. Hide, Jonas whispered urgently. Valera pulled him into a narrow alcove just as a pair of guards rounded the corner. Jonas held his breath, his heart pounding. They were so close. He could feel Valera's body pressed against his, her breath shaky, matching his own. The guards walked by without noticing them. The tension in Jonas' chest didn't ease until the sound of their footsteps faded into the distance. "That was too close," Jonas murmured. Valera nodded, her face pale. "We can't afford to get careless. Let's move." They finally reached the edge of the garden, where a small ship, Valera's escape vessel, was hidden. Jonas felt a strange rush of adrenaline as they climbed aboard. As the ship's engines roared to life, Jonas couldn't help but glance back at the palace one last time. This was it, the beginning of a new chapter for both of them. And as the ship lifted off into the night sky, Jonas felt a sense of freedom he hadn't experienced in a long time. They were no longer prisoners. The stars outside the small ship were distant, cold, and infinite. But inside, Jonas and Valera felt a strange sense of freedom. The heavy weight of the palace, the oppressive rules of the Zarinthian Empire, they were now behind them. For the first time, they were truly on their own. Valera sat at the controls, her fingers moving quickly across the holographic console. Her usual calm, confident demeanor had returned, but Jonas noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes kept scanning the radar for any sign of pursuit. "We're not safe yet," she said, her voice steady but with an edge of urgency. Jonas stood behind her, looking over her shoulder. "You think they'll find us?" Valera hesitated, her fingers hovering over the controls. "They will. They won't let a defection like this go unpunished. The Empire will send everything after us." Jonas clenched his jaw. "Then we'll have to stay ahead of them." Her eyes flicked to him. "You're not thinking of running, are you?" Jonas met her gaze, his voice firm. "We've got nowhere to run, but we've got a chance to fight." She seemed to consider this for a moment, and then a small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at her lips. "You're right. Running won't get us anywhere." They flew through the dark expanse of space, carefully weaving through asteroid fields and past uncharted systems. Jonas had learned a lot in the last few days, and Valera had been a surprisingly skilled teacher. But there was still a lot they didn't know about how to stay hidden from the Empire's radar. Jonas knew one thing for sure: they had to keep moving. Hours later, their journey took them to a distant, uninhabited moon. It was the perfect place to hide. For a while, Valera landed the ship in a shallow valley, surrounded by towering cliffs and rocky terrain. No one would think to look here. Jonas helped her secure the ship. Then they both moved to the rocky outcrop near the base of the cliffs. They sat silently, both of them watching the sky. The peaceful quiet of the moon's surface felt strange, as though it was mocking their sense of relief. The quiet was broken by a sudden beeping sound from the ship's communications console. Valera immediately turned and sprinted back to the ship. Jonas followed, his heart racing. As soon as she reached the console, her eyes widened. "They found us." Jonas's stomach dropped. "How?" Valera tapped at the controls, pulling up the transmission. It was a message from the Empire, a warning. The Zarinthian fleet was already on its way, a full military force sent to capture them. "No one escapes the Empire," the message said. "Return immediately or face complete annihilation." Jonas turned to her. "What now?" Valera's face was hard, her expression unreadable. "We fight. We've come this far. We won't let them take us back." Jonas nodded. "We'll make them regret coming after us." The ship's engines roared to life again, this time with a new sense of urgency. Jonas and Valera knew they were outnumbered, but they also knew they had the element of surprise. They were no longer the hunted. Now, they were the hunters. The Zarinthian fleet was closing in. A wave of cold fear washed over Jonas as he sat beside Valera in the cockpit, watching the readouts flashing on the console. They had only moments before the Empire's forces arrived. Jonas glanced at Valera, who was focused on the controls. Her hands moved with swift, practiced precision, but Jonas could see the strain in her face. The Zarinthian Empire was relentless. It would not stop until they had either captured or destroyed them. "We don't have long," she said, her voice steady but laced with tension. Jonas knew the odds were against them. They were just one small ship against a fleet of warships, but he wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not after everything they had been through together. "I've been thinking," Jonas said, his voice low. "If we keep running, we'll just keep looking over our shoulders. We can't live like that forever." Valeera didn't answer immediately. She simply focused on maneuvering the ship through the asteroid field they had entered, the rocks crashing past them at high speeds. "You're right," she finally said, her voice softening. "We can't keep running. But there's only one choice we can make now." Jonas turned to her, confused. "What do you mean?" Valeera met his gaze, her eyes filled with determination. "We face them. We stand our ground. Together." Jonas stared at her for a moment, feeling the weight of her words. She wasn't asking him to fight alone. She was asking him to stand by her side, just as she had stood by him. She wasn't just the alien noble anymore. She wasn't just the experimenter or the ruler. She had become something more, someone he could trust. "I'm with you," Jonas said, his voice steady. With one final, sharp movement, Valeera pulled the ship out of the asteroid field, pushing the engines to their limits. The stars outside the cockpit blurred as the ship rocketed toward the incoming Zorinthian fleet. Jonas could feel the ship shaking with the force of the speed, but he knew they had to keep going. The fight was inevitable, and they couldn't hide anymore. In the distance, the enormous fleet loomed, a collection of ships, their weapons primed and ready. But they were not the ones with the advantage anymore. Jonas and Valeera had something the Empire didn't: each other. As the Zorinthian fleet came into view, Valeera's hand gripped the controls tighter. She didn't look away from the incoming ships, but she spoke with a calm certainty. "We will not be taken," she said, the words sharp and clear. Jonas nodded. He didn't know if they would win, but he knew one thing for sure. This was no longer about escaping. It was about fighting for their future. The first blast from a Zorinthian ship came at them, and Jonas braced himself. The ship shuddered from the impact, but they kept pushing forward. A firestorm of blaster fire lit up the dark space around them as the ship weaved and dodged through enemy fire. Jonas gripped the edge of his seat, focusing entirely on the moment. He wasn't going to let them take Valeera. Not now. Not ever. As they cut through the enemy lines, the battle became a blur of flashing lights and quick decisions. They dodged and weaved, outmaneuvering the larger ships with skill and speed. Together, they made a team, a force the Empire hadn't counted on. And in the midst of the chaos, as the battle raged on, Jonas realized something. The fight wasn't just for survival. It was for the chance to live freely, for a chance to create something more than just a future of fear. They would win this fight. Together.